Welcome to the Find My Catalyst podcast. We all have problems we're looking to solve, and we know that there are solutions out there, but we struggle with this. How do we find the solution? Where does that nudge come from to help us take the next step and start solving tough problems? The intention of this podcast is to help you find your catalyst and take that next step. I'm Mike Simmons. I'm the founder of Catalyst Sale, and I'm really excited to have John Morris join me on the podcast today. John is the executive director of brand, host of the In the Club podcast, and he is working currently with Club Colors. Let's get to the conversation. John, thanks for joining me today. It is awesome to meet you. How are you?
My pleasure, Mike. Thanks. Nice to meet you as well.
So let's talk a little bit about this, just kind of as we dive right into the discussion. How is it that, what are some of the common mistakes that organizations make when it comes to thinking about culture?
Yeah. I think it's interesting because the culture is a system, control, and procedure, right? But much like management, you have to manage each individual different within a system, right? So you have to have a game plan. You have to have a defined set of core principles. You have to have a defined system to manage, control, and fuel culture, right? But you have to manage each individual different within that system, control, and procedure. For instance, we just started something today. Actually, I'm excited coming off of this. We started something today called Imagine More Mondays. One of our core values at Club Colors is be free to imagine more. So we kind of took a play on that. And this stemmed from, we had our State of the Union presentation last week. And as part of that, we kind of tied in a raffle where we just picked random numbers and we gave away prizes to the staff and employees to kind of get them riled up and excited. And as I looked around the room, I just recognized the energy that came from that. It was just absolutely outstanding. And it wasn't people cheering for themselves when they won. It was others cheering for someone else when they won, right? And that energy creates kind of a momentum. But as I also witnessed some of the people coming up, they were jumping up and down and wanted to say something after they had won. There were other folks that kind of came up there, but just grabbed their prize and wanted to get the heck out of there, right? So I think a lot of it has to do with understanding. Some folks want to be put on stage, some folks don't. And understanding that in order to have a dynamic culture, you have to know who the individual people are within that and what actually fuels them, what reacts. So you have to build the system and you have to nurture it and you have to fuel it, but you have to make sure that you put people in a position in that rewards and recognition and culture building where they're going to feel comfortable. It's going to inspire them. It's not going to put them in a position where they feel awkward or, they're like, I never want to do that again, right? You're not going to get a great result after the fact. And anything you do culture wise, let's face it, is to create an experience for the brand. And it works in multiple levels. You're going to drive productivity and you're ultimately going to utilize that hopefully for some sort of content creation or some sort of internal branding that inspires and creates retention, but also can be used as a recruiting platform, right?
When you think about just kind of getting to the root of what is it that gets people going and how do I determine who are the people in the room who get really excited about being in front of everybody and those people who really don't want to get in front of everybody? What's your process look like as you get to know the people inside the organization and how do you go about it?
So we start off with something prior to hiring called Culture Index.
Okay.
And that's how we identify personality types of, who's an analytical personality versus who's a driver, right? Who likes to be on stage, who's an introvert versus an extrovert. And it kind of breaks down all those things. And it helps us not only with employee placement, but understanding whether or not they would be right for our culture. Not only the whole culture, but the culture within that particular division and within that role, right? So from there, it's having continuous one-on-ones. So we have scheduled one-on-ones, the manager with that particular employee. And we also do a net promoter score where we send out surveys to employees to understand what their thoughts are on their role, how it could be better, or what's their approval rating of how culture is, how the role is, how compensation is, what their thoughts are on management style. And off of that net promoter score, we get a good idea of whether or not we truly are creating the experience that we want for the employees, or do we just think that we're creating a great experience, but they don't, right? We need them, that team, to essentially give us the validation that we're doing the right things to keep them happy and inspired. And if they're not, then we need to modify and change, and we need to listen to them to understand that. So a lot of it comes from just continuous communication from the managers then going to the executive team and saying, this is the personality type. These are the people. This is what would help my division. This would help me to inspire my crew. So it's a casting a wide net, getting everyone's viewpoints, understanding their personality types. And then, of course, understanding the personality types helps you to coach instead of manage. And I think that that's a big thing. Managers tend to look, in my belief anyways, they tend to look more at the numbers. Are we hitting the numbers? Are we hitting the systems? Are we hitting the process? Are we hitting the procedure? Coaches look at how you get people to raise their game and to function more effectively within the system to get a better experience and a better result. So we've really put a lot of time and effort into getting our management team to understand how to coach versus how to manage.
So how has that worked inside the organization or in organizations that you've been a part of when you start to make that transition from manager to coach, or looking at the distinction between managing people and managing processes and managing activities versus some of this coaching and development? What does that look like inside the organization, and what's the adoption process look like?
I love the word that you said, adoption process, because that's exactly what it is, right? It's adoption over compliance. So think of it this way. I could walk in your office and say, hey, you didn't hit your numbers. What's wrong? Or I could say, hey, you didn't hit your numbers. How can I help? So it's just a little tweak in mindset and that modification. And it's kind of a culture of kindness and creating a stewardship. So rather than, and I know we've all had managers like this. I've had managers like this where they're like, hey, you didn't hit your numbers. What are you going to do to get your numbers right? What are you going to do to get this right? And in many cases, if I knew how to do what they're asking me to do, I probably would have done it. It's not because I'm just a lazy human, right? I want to succeed. So just that, hey, what are you going to do in order to get your numbers creates a tension and a conflict, right? Versus going in and saying, hey, you didn't hit your numbers. It's okay. Okay. Now, I'm not saying 7 months in a row. I'm saying, that 1 month and that one-on-one, you didn't hit your numbers. What can I do to help? Let's map this out and let's work together to get you moving in that right direction. Let's customize a plan that gets you moving in that right direction. And I'll be there with you along the way. Now, I'm going to put mine in. I'm going to put my time and effort in. I'm going to go for it. It's up to you to put your time and effort in. And collectively, we will work to get you to the numbers that you want to achieve. And we'll work together to get you to the experience that you want to achieve. Right. So it's a way of communicating.
What are some of the processes or practices that you like to apply when it comes to accountability in that context? So as you're working not only in the communication and everything sounds good in the moment, but what does your system look like? How does your process play out relative to accountability?
So if you manage the numbers by the minute and everyone's aware of what the numbers are by the minute, all you have to do is post the numbers, right? So we believe a lot in scoreboards. We put everything up so everybody knows where they stand at all times. And by having that transparency, everybody can see where everyone stands. Now, it's the reaction to those scoreboards that's the difference maker, right? The scoreboards are enough accountability as it is. I don't know about you, but if I busted my hump and I'm at the bottom of the scoreboard and everyone next to me and around me and across the country can see that I ranked in the bottom 5% for that month or currently that day or whatever it might be. Look, if I'm a winner with a winner personality, right, in which we try and hire here, you're going to look at that and go, I don't like that feeling. So there's two things. The scoreboards going out create enough accountability as it is. The one-on-one meetings create accountability because you're fully aware and you're talking it through. But the other thing is sharing wins on a regular basis. If you share wins on a regular basis, and when I say regular basis, I mean in real time as they're happening, not once a week, not 2 weeks out, not once a month you comment about somebody's performance, but as wins are happening in a daily basis, you're sharing those things. It creates a rewards and recognition atmosphere. People like to know that they're being recognized for their hard work. So there's two levels of accountability. One is I'm on the scoreboard at the low end. The other thing is I'm watching my peer get recognized for performing at a high level. And that creates a little bit of competitiveness and causes me to say, hey, I want to be like that. Right. So you can't just recognize when somebody doesn't perform. And then when they win, you just kind of, you're supposed to win. Right. I think you've got to overdo and really accentuate the wins. And that creates that kind of momentum and that atmosphere in the organization. And then the behind the scenes accountability conversations are being had, but the scoreboard does the majority of the accountability. People don't like to see them. People like to see their names and name in lights, but they'd rather it to be a green light than a red one.
Yeah. This is one of the things I struggled with is in a couple of different individual contributor roles. I was one of those people, and I always involved in enterprise sales, so longer sales cycles, who I might be at the bottom of the leaderboard for the first 10 months of the year. And then I was top 2 or 3 or 1 in some cases at the end of the year. So how do you balance that long, when you've got these longer term sales cycles or longer term objectives? How do you balance the measurements so that you don't disincentivize those who maybe are doing all of the right things, and ultimately things are going to play out the way that they'll play out? But for the first, the first 10, some roles, the first 10 months, I would get crap about, what do you do? Take the first 10 months of the year off and then just show up in November or show up at the end of October?
Farming like crazy, right?
Well, you're hunting and setting things up and putting the stuff in place and doing the long-term things that are going to impact success as you go along. So how do you, given some of the stuff that you shared earlier about that, knowing the type of person, and I was never the type of person who wanted to be in front of the group either. So I didn't
and meanwhile, you're hosting a podcast.
It's weird. It's weird. I love the podcast because I can do the one-on-one stuff with people. And we can have a really good, deep conversation. And I've gotten more comfortable with doing more of the group stuff. But anyhow, how do you balance that when you know that you've got this kind of short-term, long-term leaderboard, measuring the right metrics? What do you think about that?
So I have a saying: mindset, behavior, technique equals sales success, or you could eliminate sales and just say success. Mindset, behavior, technique, right?
Yep.
The reason I came up with that is because I was one of those people who always wanted the outcome and always beat myself up because I always had very high expectations. And I had a couple mentors and some people that essentially said, hey, man, stop rewarding yourself for the outcomes. The outcomes are the outcomes. Start rewarding yourself for the steps, the journey, the process, right? So get granular with the process. Get granular. So when we started to build out, how are we going to recognize people here at the organization? How are we going to build a culture where we get outcomes? Well, if you want to get great outcomes for your team, reward them for the steps, the journey, the granular process. Recognize that they're taking the steps. So for instance, not every win share needs to be that somebody closed this huge deal. A win share could be that somebody was up 400% this week over last week in their activity, in their touches, because those things are all going to play out and eventually turn into fantastic outcomes. And then remember that you recognize that, because when the outcome happens, then you need to go back and say, hey, remember 5 weeks ago when we recognized so-and-so for 400% increase in their activity? Guess what? They're 300% up over budget now because they put in the time, they put in the effort, they put in. Everybody in business, not everybody, but so many people recognize simply the outcome. It's a performance-based thing, right? But the reality is you got to really put some time and emphasis into the effort. None of us get paid for effort, but we do get paid for working a process, for staying in the process, for not getting outside of our lane, and for going the extra mile in each one of those categories. And if we're really great coaches and managers and executives, why would we have a process in place and then not recognize people for following that process and excelling in the process, even if the outcome isn't there yet? The outcome will come if our process is great.
Why do you think people struggle with this? Because this all makes sense to me, right? You trust the process, which I think has been said many, many times, over a long period of time. And then you get into some of the, I think, what is it, A.T.? Which is the system is the solution. But you go through all of these things, so we understand it. We can see this stuff on paper and understand, comprehend what it is. But why do we fall into the trap of this short-term thinking and get nervous and get scared and start reacting to the outcomes? Go ahead. Go on. I see your phone.
Faster.
Okay, so you've got a phone. You've got a phone,
baby. I don't need to do it. Look, I can just want to get an answer. I'll Google it. Want to order something? I'll Amazon it. Right? Faster, faster, now, now. I want it now. I want it now. Guess what? Great results don't just happen now. It's not on great results aren't on your phone, baby. Like, guess what? If that was the case, then we'd all buy an app that just gave us abs. Doesn't exist.
I'm telling you, I'm looking for the app. One of these days, I'm going to find that app that's just going to, just going to be immediate. It's like that something about Mary.
Man, it doesn't work. Episode. I've looked for it too. The fact is that we have stopped finding joy, or maybe we never found joy, or maybe not enough people do. I don't know what it is. If I did, man, I'd be on an island somewhere. I'd be a billionaire if I had the solution. But the reality is I think that we don't put enough time and emphasis into the joy of the process. It's the blood, sweat, and tears that, annoy us. It shouldn't annoy us. That's what should gratify us. Right? It should give us excitement. Like, we're doing it. We're going. And we just don't have patience. We got to take a deep breath and have patience and understand that, immediate gratification is good. It's immediate, but it's not sustained, right? Sustained gratification, sustained momentum, sustained profitable growth comes from working that process with patience, trusting it, staying with it, building on it, modifying, recalibrating, going at it again, keep getting better, right? Cliche. Here's the deal though. Cliche for a reason, because it works. It works. I just think that we lack patience.
Yeah. It's funny to see, like, we all know it. Imagine, and I'm trying to think of who said this. This might be a James Clear thing, or it might be a Stephen Pressfield thing, or so one of those, someone smarter than me who said this, but it was, if your kid, when it's learning how to walk, didn't walk the first time, would you send the kid away? Would you just give up and say, okay, well, I guess I've just got a kid who's never going to figure out how to walk or isn't going to figure out how to talk? No, you wouldn't. You'd continue to go through the process and the journey. And yet we, as leaders out there, and more specifically, managers who aren't comfortable with the leadership or don't have the leadership experience, we tend to manage to these things, especially if we've just moved from an individual contributor role into a management role, and we expect, well, we just do it this way and you can do it. And we
work for me, that they should work for you.
Yeah, right. And so this is the beauty of these kind of conversations is, what to do. Even if you don't know what to do, that there are some things that people have done that have been successful in those areas. Try those and do those and let the process work itself out. And as John highlighted, iterate on it. Like, be okay with the idea when the data comes back that now it's time for me to make some adjustments. So, John, how does this translate into your experience relative to building brands and kind of we'll start on the marketing side and then kind of get into the sales and talk about that a bit. But how does all of the stuff that we're talking about related to culture, related to process, related to leaderboards and accountability and coaching, how does that apply to building brands?
Yeah. So building a brand has there's two sides to it, right? There's internal and external. And if the internal is really good, then it'll translate more to the external. And if the external is really good, it builds a loyalty and people are starting to really talk about the organization. That then translates to the internal, because the internal goes, oh, it's working, right? Because they start to see it. So, a lot of the things that we do internally is proof of concept, because we're talking to clients about how they can drive their brand, right? How they can build their culture, how they can create an experience, a feeling within their organization, right? And so in order for us to do that, boy, we better be practicing it, right? If we're going to talk to clients about how they're going to build and drive their brand, we better be doing it. So the way that it translates is, we always talk about, our co-CEOs always talk about, branding is about creating an experience. It's about creating a feeling within the organization. And, there's a lot of ways to support that, logoed items, right? That makes somebody feel something, but it doesn't solve a problem. So that's got to be something that is attached to the initiative, attached to the messaging, attached to the content creation, attached to an incentive or a contest, right? And all of those things mixed together creates the ultimate experience. Somebody gets something, a product, a hard good, they're representing it, but they're being rewarded that because they followed process, they followed initiative, they created outcomes. Those outcomes then got them rewards. And then what you do is you create content to show that externally. externally goes, oh, that's a great idea. We should use that. We go, aha, we know somebody who can help you with that. And it kind of works full circle. So for us, it's about making sure that we have a balance between how much time and emphasis we put into the internal and how much we're evaluating what is working, and then how much we push that out externally to show people what we're doing and how we're doing it. And then the external is creating a make your client the hero type of experience. Because what the external clients that we're looking for when we're pushing our brand, what they want is that kind of loyalty within their own organization. They want the water cooler conversations to be, hey, how fantastic was it that we went to that event and they gave us that item? How amazing was it? Not, hey, can you believe they gave us that thing? Oh man, this thing's going to fall apart in 2 seconds, right? They want, can you believe that they're recognizing us for these things now? So if we can do it internally, we then share it externally. They start to work it. They become the heroes at their organization for making those decisions. It builds up their culture. Then they start to come to us and recognize it. So we're trying to flip the communication where everything's going external and we're telling everybody about what we're doing, to getting people to do it and start telling everybody about Club Colors came up with that idea and helped us to do that. So it's that circle that we're trying to build.
What happens if there's a disconnect between internal and external?
Then you probably need to put a really strong look at your internal first and foremost, because either it's phony and it's not really believable and it's a process that people are trying to put in place. Look, if you want to know whether or not a process is actually working, you used the word earlier. Is it being adopted or is it compliance? If a process is being done because people are complying to it, you don't have a dynamic bought-in culture, right? If folks are adopting it and coming to management and managing up and saying, hey, I love this idea. What if we tried this? What if we added to this? Could we look at it this way? That's when you start to know. Now, once that is happening internally, then you've got brand champions that are pushing that out externally.
It's kind of interesting. As you were talking about that, it sounded like you go from adoption to engagement.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Well, it's this too, right? So our CEOs always talk about, do people have a job or they have a role?
Yeah.
If they have a job, we need to get them to the point where they feel like they have a role. Because no matter what your position is in the organization, doesn't matter your title or your function. If you feel like you have a job, then you're not fully bought into what the overall collective vision of the organization is. And that you play a key part in that, no matter what your income is or what your title is. When people start to feel like they have a role at the organization, and without that role, that cog does not work effectively. When they start to understand and believe that their role plays a part in the growth of the organization, in the success of the organization, no matter the level, then you've got people really bought in. Then you got brand champions. Then they become recruiters for you. They're selling for you. They're marketers for you. They're telling everybody, ABCCC, always be closing Club Colors, right? So that's a saying we have here. We want people, no matter what your role is, always talking about the experience at Club Colors. And it's up to us to create that for them.
So how do you define experience? Like, what if someone says, hey, John, what's the word experience mean? What does it mean to you?
Okay, so experience for us should mean that it hits multiple senses. It hits multiple functions. Like, it shouldn't just hit their paycheck. There's a lot of people out there that work at companies where they make a tremendous income and they hate going there. So here's a good indication. Do people beat you to work and you manage the department? Do you have to tell people to leave? Like, go home? Do you have to tell people to take a vacation? Like, take a break? Do you have to do more pressure valve releasing than inspiring? Meaning you're doing more like, hey, it's going to be okay. Chill out. I know you want to hit this. Take your time, relax. If you're having more conversations like that, then you've got people that are really digging the experience because they're fully bought in and it means something to them. It means something in their heart, their mind, their soul. Do they talk to their families? When you see their families at a function, does the spouse, husband, wife, partner, whomever, come up to you and say, wow, I've heard so much about you? And you say, yeah, well, was it good? Yeah, it was all good, right? That's when you know you're impacting people. So every business is a people business. And if you're putting a lot of time and emphasis into the people having an overall full comprehensive life experience, it's one thing to make a living. It's a whole nother thing to make a life. And so Club Colors for us is a vehicle to reach our greater purpose. And that greater purpose could be doing more charity, coaching kids, building a family, paying off your loan, whatever that thing is, that's your greater purpose. It's up to Club Colors to create for our staff, our team, the type of life and experience where they can facilitate that purpose.
What if somebody's out there and they're struggling with figuring out what their purpose is? Are there some questions that we can ask ourselves, or is there an approach that we can take to help get a better sense for that purpose?
Sure. People all want like the big purpose, right? Like you're going to cure cancer, or you're going to, feed all the poor in a country and so on. And those things are fantastic. Unfortunately, in a capitalist world that we live in, you have to make a lot of money in order to have a huge impact on those things. So I think sometimes people lack purpose because they try and make the purpose too big. Purpose can be a whole bunch of little small things. What revs you up? What fires you up? A purpose for me is I love coaching my kids in sports. Fires me up. And not just because I like to see my kids, I like to see other people's kids. I like to see them do well. We were talking earlier, and I was thinking as we were kind of talking through a part about the child on the team that is clumsy and wears his glove on the wrong hand, and it's got boogies in his nose all the time, and looks like he drank 5 gallons of red Kool-Aid before he got there, and doesn't really know where to go. That kid, man, that's the one that fires me up. Because if I can get that kid to want to play baseball next year, I don't even care about whether or not he gets a hit or catches a ball. Does he want to play next year? And when the parent says to me at the end of the year, I can't believe it, he wants to sign up. I had to push him into it this year. He wants to play next year. Mission accomplished. I don't care if we won a trophy. I don't care what the championship is. I don't care. Those things are awesome. Don't get me wrong. For the players that are really, really engaged, I want those things too. But behind the scenes, in my heart, what really fires me up is not somebody saying, hey, I saw you went 15-1. You made a championship game. That's cool. It's the parents saying, little Bobby wants to play next year. So guess what? That's not a huge purpose. That's not saving the world. But for that parent and for that kid, that's a moment. Because now what's going to happen is that dad or that mom gets the drive to the game to talk to little Bobby, gets the drive home to say, you did so good, right? That for me fires me up, lifts me up, can't wait for the next day. So when I look at purpose doesn't need to be a giant thing. It needs to be the thing that fills your heart. Take the garbage down for your neighbor.
Well, you highlighted a couple of things, and one of the big ones is just one, it doesn't have to be a really, really big thing. It can be a lot smaller. You can get a lot of joy and excitement from the little things that will fill your heart. One of my favorite times was when I was coaching the kids in I-9 flag football. And we just got to the point where my coaching ability was going to stifle their development. So that happened right about the junior high level. And then they started playing more of the organized type stuff. But it was awesome because you get to meet the kids in the neighborhood, and you get to meet the parents, and then you start to see those kids develop and perform as athletes at other levels. What are some other lessons that you learn from coaching kids in baseball that apply to business, maybe shifted the way that you might have approached leadership or the professional side of the work that you do as a result of the experience you've had working with kids in youth sports?
Have a clear message. Shouldn't be too much. I give them 3 things. Yep. 3 things, right? 3 things. And we say them 25 times at practice. And we talk about them at the end. And we recognize one kid for each one of those 3 at the end, right? And I'll change the 3 every year, just kind of like whatever I'm feeling, but they're pretty consistent. Fundamentals, right? So with baseball, the parents look at me for like the first 5 practices, like, what is wrong with this guy? All I have him do is run bases, because running and hustling never slumps. Running the bases the right way never slumps, right? And guess what? You only get a hit 1 out of 2 or 1 out of 3 at that level times. Well, when you get that hit, you better run the bases right if it's going to be a good hit, right? So we focus on the basics. 3 things, very clear. We stay with it. Next is we reward people for where they are, the level they're at. So Big Johnny hits a home run is equal to little Bobby going to the right position when I tell him what the right position is. Little Bobby gets a lot of praise for knowing the difference between right field and left field, because for him, that's huge. And he needs that to be able to embrace the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. For Big Johnny, if I say, hey, great job, you went to the right position, he looks at me like, what the heck? I just hit a home run. So you got to know how to praise them at the level. So meeting them at the level they're at. And then the next thing and the last thing is have a short memory. Kids are unbelievable at shaking off a win and shaking off a loss. It's amazing. When they win, they celebrate, and then they want to know where the concession stand is to go get their popsicle, right? When they lose, they cry. They're upset, and then they want to know where the concession stand is to go get the popsicle, right? So don't put too much stock and emphasis on wins and losses in life. They happen. Learn from the losses, celebrate the wins, and move on. Never get too high, never get too low. Short memory, quick, and stick to the fundamentals, the three things. So the next game, next practice, what do we start with? What are the three things we're going to do today, right? And I have them say it. Once they say it, then I start saying, what are our three things? So I stop saying I start it, then I stop saying it. Now you lead it. What are the three things? Who knows this one? Who knows that one? What's the order? Then they start saying it. Then they start owning it. And I know it's working when I say something and they go, Coach, no, that's not the one. You said it wrong. It's this. Good. So sometimes I'll say it wrong on purpose to see if they've been listening. So those are the main things.
I think it's awesome. So I just want to highlight and reinforce a couple of the things that you said there. Number one, the importance of clarity of communication. And think about how often, whether it's in just business or life, sales, we run into these challenges with communication. And many times it's because either we're not being clear in our message, or we've not validated on the other end that the message has been received. Then you got into the discussion about understanding your team and knowing, hey, the difference between Johnny and Bobby, I think it was Bobby, but yeah. So the difference between Johnny and Bobby, and being able to play to those strengths and realize that you've got a team of people for a reason, play to those strengths, understand the people that are on the team so that you can put them in the best position to win and reinforce and recognize. And then my favorite one, which is the one that you closed on, is the never get too high, never get too low. Have a short-term memory. Be comfortable with the idea that, you know what, even when you work your process, there are sometimes you're just going to run out of time. And I played one season of Little League baseball, and my claim to fame was in the championship game. I turned into a inside pitch so that I could get on base.
That's a movie right there, man.
That was the only time I got on base all year. And it just that one. But I remember it, and I saw opportunity and took advantage of it. Baseball was never my thing.
The teammates, man, they were like, "Don't mess with Mike. Mike will take a punch. Mike will get hit." Right. So all of a sudden they were like, "Oh, Mike didn't do this. Mike didn't do that." And then guess what? You went to school. It was like, "Hey, Mike didn't get a hit. He got hit, and he helped us win."
It's awesome. And so you take these things and you think about it. They apply directly to the work that we're doing. We continue to overcomplicate the work that we're doing. We keep, hey, let's, keep trying new things rather than trusting the process and letting them play out, looking at the shiny things. And when we're going and chasing all the shiny things, it's really hard to communicate with a level of clarity across the team so that we can do the work that needs to be done. Really powerful stuff. And I think anybody who's not had an opportunity to coach youth sports should take advantage of that opportunity, whether it's coaching youth sports or getting involved in band or getting involved in the arts, whatever it is. When you start working with kids, you get a sense for how much we overcomplicate things in the work that we're doing.
So true. And I got to tell you, I understand why actors and actresses that said, never work with kids, never work with dogs, right? It's because they wanted this tremendous outcome and they couldn't just kind of laugh at the situation, but there's so much joy in it. And you learn so much. I was saying to somebody else the other day, I get more that I bring to work from coaching kids. I'll go coach, and then the next day I've got 5 things to talk to my team about, right? Whereas I'm not telling my kids that I'm coaching a whole lot about what happened at work or as much, because you just get caught up. It's moving so fast, right? And so many things are happening. But gosh, I get so much from coaching the kids because it's so simple, so easy. And you can really put it into, these simple terms. And adults can really remember back to when they were a kid. It's tough as an adult to think about where they're going to be, but everyone can remember where they were when they were in that experience and how they reacted to that and how it touches them. And so, I get a lot from that. But the main thing, like you said, branding is about a clear branding, management, building an organization, driving an organization, clarity of vision, clarity of message. And don't overcomplicate. 3 things, 4 things. Work those 3 or 4 things really, really well. Let your team work those 4 things in a granular basis. They'll do amazing, magical things. Reward and recognize when they do those 3 or 4 things. Get them inspired about it.
Yeah, one of the things that's come up over the course of the conversation is at least a theme that is resonating for me is the importance of design and being intentional about the way that you design, whether it's designing for experiences or designing for reporting or designing for being able to hold coaching. How does design play in when someone says design for experience as an example? What does that mean to you, and how does that apply to the work that you're doing?
Well, I think that a couple things apply to that. First off, you should have proof of concept. Second, you probably shouldn't ask folks to do anything that you haven't done before and done well or are completely aware of. And then third, you should reverse engineer it. So you should have enough proof of concept and have had enough success internally or tried those things, or at least done enough research on it to have an understanding of what is a reasonable outcome. If you set the mark so high that it's not attainable, you'll lose everybody, right? So you can always set a mark, hit it, and then adjust or modify and move it up. And I remember how my dad taught me how to swim, right? He'd stand in the pool about 2 feet from the side and he'd say, jump in. When I jump in, he promised he'd catch me. Oh God, he promised, right? The first few times he caught me. So now I had trust, right? It was an easy thing. Then he moved back. He said, come on now. I was like, oh man, it's 3 feet. I don't know if I could do it, right? So I jump in, and guess what the son of a gun would do? He'd move back 1.5 feet and make me swim to him. And I'd panic. And then he'd go, how'd you do? And I go, I got you, right? And then he'd push me back to the side. And then he'd go, next thing you know, I'm swimming 8 feet, swimming 9 feet, kept moving back, right? But he started me off in a spot where he knew I could get to, and he knew that I would feel safe. And then he gradually moved me back. So you can set an outcome and then modify and move it back and have people swim to you, and then start moving the expectations up. And then guess what? People start to achieve things that they didn't think they could do. And by the way, that is the best as a leader. It's not when they achieve things you thought they could do. It's when they achieve things they didn't think they could do, right? It's when they do things they don't think or didn't think that they could achieve, and you move back. You kept moving back and made them swim to you, and then they swim past you. Ooh, that's powerful, right? That's fun. So I think that, that's a key way is to have the proof of concept, know what reasonable outcomes are, right? Let them feel some wins, modify and move it back and adjust and design it in that manner. Then you can reverse engineer what the steps are, and you kind of have a predictive strategy. You kind of have a predictive understanding of what's going to happen, and then make them blow your mind with the results, because you can only predict so much, right? But they got to feel wins or they won't keep fighting. Got to make the first few, not easy wins, but reasonable wins, and then move it back on them.
Yeah, I think that's a really important idea and concept that gets lost, is this whole idea of growth or conditioning through successive approximation. So there's just these incremental pieces that you continue to move along on, so that when you look back, it all looks like one giant leap. John, this has been an awesome conversation. Thanks for joining me today. Where can people find out more about what you're working on and connect with you directly if they'd like to do so?
Sure, absolutely. My email is jmorris@clubcolors.com. Again, J, the letter J, jmorris, MORRIS @clubcolors.com. So you can email me and I'll certainly respond. You can check out my LinkedIn page. By the way, if you go on my LinkedIn page, you're going to see a clover in front of my name and a clover behind it, John Morris. Go on my features, take our logo challenge. If you're a decision maker at a business about promotional items or marketing collateral, want to build an event out, have giveaways, take our logo challenge. We send you a free item that you picked. We'll embroider it with your company logo on it. We'll prove how good we are before you spend a dime with us. It's free. It's our way of showing who we are and what we do before we talk with you about who we are and what we do. And you can certainly take a look at our podcast, In the Club, powered by Club Colors, which we started last year. We've done 11 episodes launched so far. We got 3 more coming, and we'll hopefully do about 50 to 60 this year.
Awesome. If you know of somebody who would enjoy this podcast episode or enjoy the conversation, gain value out of it, please share it with them, and let John and I know both via LinkedIn and Twitter. That's where I'm more active on, are those two channels. And let us know that you've shared it with folks. Sales is a thinking process. Life is a thinking process. Business is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about yours?